Hello and welcome to Live at Kigali 2022. I am Pranjal Sharma. Today we are going to be discussing something which is very important and something that we've lived in the last few months. The story of telling despair and hope, talking about reality and creativity. With me is Sahraa Karimi. She is a filmmaker from Afghanistan. And Hallelujah Lulie. He's a doctorate student at UK and from Ethiopia. One of the most important issues that we have to discuss and explore, Sahraa, is that in the time of crisis, in the time of pandemic, everybody has pain. So there is a feeling that my pain is perhaps bigger than yours, or I'm so worried about my own pain that I don't want to listen to anybody else. In a time like this, how are stories to be told?
So I don't know what to say about the time of pandemic because I really didn't experience that kind of problem during pandemic because I was in Afghanistan and I was so busy with work. So even we had some issues with the pandemic, but I myself didn't very much pay attention. So, but in Europe, for example, when I came to Europe, I see that people, they really face many issues during the pandemic. Some of them, they discovered new things about themselves, about their life, about their future, about their life plan, and about their even identity. And for example, some of my students, I teach at Rome Film School. Some of my students, they made like short films, documentary films about this time. I think pandemic, and beside it is a kind of it's not a very pleasant time, but it can be a big chance.
But pandemic was also with the crisis in Afghanistan.
Yes.
Then there is the war in Ukraine. So we have an intersection of human tragedies.
Yeah.
In a time like this, a filmmaker like you, when you want to tell a story, either of hope or despair, pain or joy.
Filmmakers, their responsibility is to tell stories and to reflect the reality. Of course, filmmaking is a work of creativity. You use your talent and your creative talent to retell or to reshow the reality. I think it is not very welcome when you want to show dark time through dark structure. Through dark. Way of storytelling.
You have to think of a new way of telling
you
the story.
You should use your creativity and you should think about the new way of storytelling to deliver what you want, because storytelling is also about messaging.
I'm going to ask Harley to react to this.
I think the time of the pandemic exposed a lot of things. The first one is that human progress is not as linear as we think it is. With all the advancement in science, technology, medicine, the world was faced with serious challenge. That and that's that understanding. I think that revelation. It is shocking. There's an element of despair, but at the same time, there's an element of hope as well. Because it's so liberating in a way, because it gives you a very good perspective about our understanding of history, our understanding of humanity, and which direction humanity would go. For me, I think of course, it wasn't a great leveler, because we've seen that with the distribution of the vaccine, with the economic packages that followed the pandemic, we saw the reproduction of existing inequalities in the world. But at the same time, everybody was exposed to it.
But at a point like this, Harley, that's the point. When you want to express yourself and tell your story, you find that nobody is listening because everybody has their own story to tell. What happens then?
Well, who is you at this point, in a way? Because it could be not an individual level, or are we talking about the global south, or individual specific countries, or individuals, in a way? So
Let's focus on individuals because storytelling is individual, personal effort.
You know what? I do not agree with that people they don't want to listen to your story. During the pandemic, in general, I'm not talking about Afghanistan. In general, stories, watching stories, listening to stories, and connecting with digital media with many streamers that we have right now. Those stories somehow saved human beings. You know.
and it's very connected as well, in a way, because for example, a number of I know people who won a scholarship that was cancelled because of the whose businesses went bankrupt, but it was partly a pain that was shared by many. So a shared pain is significantly minimized.
There was a crisis in Ethiopia too.
There was a crisis, of course. I mean, we had a civil war that was partly informed by the pandemic, because of the pandemic, the federal government postponed the election, and the regional government said that the postponement wasn't constitutional, and they went ahead with their own election, and that mutual delegitimization eventually led to civil war, of course.
So that's the point. I'm coming back to.
You know, about the pandemic and also those times, for example, I don't know about Western countries, but in our region, many thinkers, philosophers, writers, they started to write. They started to analyze from very profound and deeper point of view this time, you know. So we also, through this disaster that we faced, we also started, like from our part, we started to create dialogues. I don't know, maybe we Eastern countries, we are like this.
Do you think it brought people together, Hale and Sir? Do you think the stories, you're saying that people were willing to listen to stories, because if I'm in pain, I'm also open to somebody else's pain. Did that bring people together?
The question is, what does together mean? Because people may reach toward the same conclusion in their own different direction, not necessarily, sharing their stories together. But one revelation, I believe, the pandemic exposed or brought to the front is the human progress is not as linear, as it is. Misery, pain, disease will continue as part of the human condition,
But you have to find joy in it?
Yes, exactly. That's a point. So there is the fact that is shared by everyone to some extent creates some kind of comfort. So there's not necessarily joy, but there's a comfort in knowing that even the most advanced countries.
You know what? Maybe physically, pandemic divided people, but somehow they started to value togetherness. This value togetherness and being together, sharing like even very simple experience together. For example, going to coffee shop and having a cup of tea or coffee. This very simple experience became very valuable. So I think.
What's your level? Are you talking about at the community level, or because the pandemic time or the time when borders were closed and countries have significantly?
No. In general, I'm talking about
at
people.
the community level.
Community level. I don't talk about.
Activities like just going for a coffee were taken for granted. Now you realize the joy of a very simple experience like that. But we have to. I want to come to a conclusion on this discussion and ask you that, and you began by saying that, how can we tell the stories better? You said use a new tool, perhaps use humor to talk about pain. perhaps use technology. So I'll request Sahraa, you and Hale to give me a quick, short response on
You
these.
know, there are many possibilities to deliver stories. There are many possibilities to tell stories. Okay, not to tell stories, to those stories you share with people. But it is very important the way and the structure and the language that you use to tell those stories are very important. You know, nowadays people they like to receive stories in very simple way. You know, but we cannot use very complicated language and structure to tell our stories. We cannot, okay? Because people are even they read more books, even they travel more, even they know more information about the world, but their mind is going to be simpler and simpler and simpler.
With lesser attention span.
Yeah. So we need to use it is kind of limitation.
But I think the question then is, and
So-
we'll have to close quickly, is perhaps can we find ways to use that limitation to your advantage by
Yes.
perhaps telling stories in a way which can go directly to the people and they find it worth relating to. Hale?
Yeah, I think stories that are rooted in the human experience, compassion, for example, they speak to people across the world, across classes, both social classes and economic classes. But one thing that I want to say regarding stories and storytelling, and even at the time of the pandemic or broader, and in the broader perspective, is the role of history, the role of using historical references, applying these historical references and having this perspective, historical perspective, that stories will be very, very important to make sense, to make meaning of the pandemic and the wars and existing power and economic relations.
Also, I think it is very important to engage people to this storytelling somehow, directly or indirectly.
So there has to be innovation there.
Yes, there
perhaps
has
use technology, perhaps use new tools of communication.
Yeah, also to give this message to people that you are yourself are storytellers. So this engaging people to storytelling, even others people, it is very important. So it needs like kind of a kind of initiative that also we can use like references or resources of storytelling from all time, but in a very new way.
I mean, just the last thing. The medium is there in a way. Of course, we cannot say that. There won't be a new medium in the future, but using even the existing mediums like photography. For
Yes.
example, I saw this fascinating campaign by some photographer that portrayed, some of the prominent European political leaders as refugees at the time of the refugee crisis.
That's a fantastic comment. We'll have to end here, and I have to thank you, Sahraa and Hale, for sharing your thoughts. But what is very clear in this conversation that we just had about reality and creativity, telling stories of despair and hope, that pain has brought people together and opened them to understand other people's pain. Sometimes in the good times we ignore that, but now we value several elements of life. And now, if we can think of new ways of communicating our pain and our joy, perhaps not through just stories of despair, but perhaps using humor, as Sahraa said and as Hale said, bring a lot of people to think about each other. I think that could be the future for all of humanity. Thank you very much for joining us today.